Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops.
And Omari Th, the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. If you are not listening to Wes and Blake Silverman over on the Pin Down, over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, you absolutely should be. Make sure you're reading all of Detroit Bad Boys stuff, all of the great Pistons content creators out there that are doing great work all regular season and now into the off season. But just a special shout out to the Detroit Free Press. Make sure you're reading all of O2's work. He is not off season O yet. That does not come around until after Summer League and Las Vegas. And then make sure you subscribe to the Motor City Hoops Substack. I do have some plans, at least. We'll see how well I can exercise those plans, but for some off-season content for you as well. Okay, so let me just set the foundation for everybody here, O2. We're going to talk through Trajan's press conference. If there was anything that stood out there, we're going to talk through Jalen, Duren, Ausar Thompson extensions and contract numbers and all of that. And I just want to get this out there at the forefront. Today, we are essentially going to talk about the offseason in a frame of Jalen, Duren, and Ausar Thompson are a part of this team moving forward. They are going to get contract extensions. They are going to be at the core of what Trajan Langdon wants to build. And so then what does that look like for the rest of the roster? So I just want everybody to know that so they're not like trying to throw Jalen, Duren trades at us, or that conversation is not today. It may come up later. I don't know, in terms of down the road, a week or two away or something. But for today, we are working under what Trajan kind of said. And maybe this is where O2, you can take us back to the Trajan Langdon press conference in terms of some of the quotes that stood out to you and specifically what he said about getting deals done with Ausar Thompson and Jalen Duren this offseason.
I mean, that was probably one of the biggest takeaways, honestly, from his press conference last week is that, he just straight up said, we're going to, we look forward to bringing Jalen Duren back, this offseason for the next 4 or 5 years or whatever, which I feel like that wasn't even really a debate until the playoff performance. And I mean, we've talked a lot about the playoffs, obviously, but I think the bottom line for this front office is you don't try to fix what isn't broken necessarily. So like there are some things you do need to fix, but what Jalen Duren gave you last season was all around positive up until you got to the playoffs. And they believe the playoff issues are fixable and correctable and not, indicative of some deeper flaws that he just can't overcome. That's their approach. He made All NBA, obviously, so he's eligible for up to 287, although I don't even know if he was going to get the previous max, which was 239. So 287, which is, between 50, 55 a year, somewhere around that. I just don't know how realistic that is. But regardless, the odds are pretty high that we're going to see him back in the Pistons uniform next season.
I want to come back to that, but I want to finish up anything on Trajan's press conference, and we'll get in even to the All-NBA stuff when we get to Duren. I think we will do Duren first in terms of the contract thing. Devon says, hey, Bryce will like this. I'm going to listen to, guess what? Cutting my grass. So he's out there cutting his grass, listening to us. We appreciate that. We got Detroit basketball. We got the Wakanda dude, Pistons fan in Memphis. And then Sean says, listening to these young men as my wife retwists my locks. Love O2 and Bryce. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate that, Sean. Anything else from Trajan's press conference, Omari, that we need to get out, talk about? Anything like that? Because we recorded before Trajan's press conference. We recorded before awards and all of that. So we'll get to those things as we go through. When's Coach of the Year come out? I meant to Google that before we started.
Tomorrow. Yeah,
okay,
so that's like
on Tuesday. One. Okay, so we'll talk through those things, right? Like we can talk through Jalen Duren making third-team All-NBA when we get to that conversation. We can talk about Ausar Thompson being first-team All-Defense when we get to his conversation. Anything before we get to those O2 that we need to talk about, get out of the way, or specifically from Trajan's press conference that maybe just stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, really the big one, and I mean, he talked about it a lot, but obviously as far as specifics, like no GM's going to come out and say, we're going to go trade for, so-and-so player, whatever it may be. But the biggest difference in tone from this year and the same time last year was that last year, Trajan was pretty, certain, like, we're not going to make a big move. It's going to be a more conservative offseason. He had already kind of projected wanting to bring back most or all of their vets, and obviously that didn't play out exactly how they anticipated, but it ended up being that type of offseason. He said, we're not looking to make any big swings. He didn't make any big swings. This year, he wouldn't rule out anything. It was, like he brought up, okay, maybe it's internal, maybe it's a draft, maybe it's a trade, maybe it's free agency, but the tone was pretty clear that the team's just in a very different place, right? You go from 44 to 60. You go from 6th seed to number 1 seed. You have 2 All-Stars, about 2 All-NBA players. This thing clearly is just at a different part of the timeline compared to a year ago. And he didn't rule anything out. He didn't say, "Oh, this is going to be a quiet summer." He didn't say that. He, said a lot of stuff that indicated that it could be a big summer. We just have to wait and see what that looks like. Obviously, he mentioned you have to pay Ausar, whose contract kicks in the year after next, and then JD, who will kick in next season. So, they've got some math to calculate as well. But this team's floor is what they did this year. Losing in 7 games to the Cleveland Cavaliers, that is, for the Needle to move forward, I think there was an understanding that they're going to have to get better and we'll see what that looks like, but they're not ruling anything out.
All right, let's go ahead and dive into Jalen Duren then. I think the best way to do this is we'll talk the Jalen Duren contract and all of that stuff. We'll talk some Ausar Thompson numbers, and then we will go bigger picture in terms of, okay, whatever those numbers end up being, quite honestly, Omari, they don't affect what you do this offseason that much. As you mentioned, Ausar's number doesn't kick in till next year, and you can do Jalen Duren after you do all of your other work this offseason. So your order of operations, no matter what Duren's number comes in at, it does matter, right? Because if you're going to pay him $50 million a year, then you can't bring in some other $50 million player. So those numbers do matter, but I think let's talk through those and then we can talk through, do we just completely run this roster back? Where are the upgrades? All of those things. So first and foremost with Jalen Duren is the fact that he made 3rd team All-NBA last night on Sunday. I did not think he was going to. I want to be very transparent here. I obviously don't have a vote. You didn't have a vote this year, but we do this on game theory. I did not have Jalen Duren on 3rd team All-NBA. I didn't even have Jalen Duren 3rd team All-NBA when I didn't think Cade Cunningham was going to be eligible. Just to get this out here, I did have Scotty Barnes. I think Scotty Barnes with Cade Cunningham eligible would have been one of my 14 locks, like guys that I definitely think should have made it. And really, I would have had Jalen Duren competing with Chet Holmgren and a few other names for the 15th spot. So where I'm at is I would not have had Jalen Duren on 3rd team All-NBA, but he is obviously in the conversation. And so the fact that he made it doesn't, it did surprise me, O2, but he was obviously in the conversation. And I want to emphasize this. What we're about to do is 2 different conversations. Him making or not making All-NBA is purely a 2025, 2026 regular season conversation. His contract number and things moving forward, you can look at what happened in the playoffs and have a conversation around that. So I just want to make sure these are different conversations, but that's where I was on Jalen Duren, and congrats to him. I think it's awesome that he made 13 All-NBA, even though I didn't necessarily have him on it.
Big accomplishment for him, of course. He and Cade are the first Pistons duo to make All-Star since 05-06 when Ben Wallace and Chauncey made it. Yeah, I wasn't sure if he was going to make it or not. I thought he was going to be somewhat on the cusp, which is what it ended up being. I forget exactly where he was in total votes. I'm actually looking it up now.
And the thing is, he wasn't 15th. I believe he was 14th and Chet was 14th.
Yeah, Chet was 15th. And then there's a pretty big gap from Chet to the next guy. Scotty only got 9 third-team votes, which was a little bit surprising for me, yeah.
We don't need to do the Scotty thing here on the Pistons Pulse. We're going to do it on game theory. I think Scotty's probably a guy that got undervalued in the regular season. I had Scotty Barnes 1st team all defense. I thought he was 3rd team All-NBA, but we don't need to do that here. Ultimately, my biggest thing was Jalen Duren was very much, I think I had 18 names, Omari, whenever I did our final All-NBA conversation, and Jalen Duren was one of them. That's all that really matters. Honestly, the bigger storyline here maybe that Cade didn't get 100 votes. That's kind of wild to me for 1st team. But anyway.
Yeah. And I think along with that, you just got to look at historically number 1 teams, how many All-NBA guys they couldn't get. And a lot of times they get 2 guys, OKC and the Pistons were the only 2 teams that had 2 guys on there.
No, Denver did as well.
Oh, Denver. Yeah, that's right. They had Jokic and Jamal Murray, but but that's not coincidental. I think you see a team win 60 games. Some of the voter logic just kind of goes, we have to reward them somehow. I will say, I find it a little funny if Duren gets 3rd team and then JB doesn't get Coach of the Year.
He does, right? That's what I thought about that today. I was like, okay, Ausar got where, honestly, Ausar ended up top 3 in DPOY, which I didn't think he was going to do. I was a little surprised by that. Duren Duren made third team All-NBA, which I was a little surprised by. And so I'm like, is this just setting us up for, okay, now they're still going to give it to Missoula or something like that? I also just want to continue to these are purely regular season awards for this season. They are very different conversations from a lot of what we have, not just with Pistons players and coaches and whatever, but players in general. So it's awesome for him. Can I give the numbers, like just what this did for him in terms of what he could potentially make? Right? I think you said a little bit earlier, but now he could go up to $287 million over 5 years, 30% of the cap, which would be 49.5 this upcoming season. That is a number that would change what you do this offseason. 53.5, 57.4, and then he'd be over $60 million by the end of that deal. Before this, he was at 5 for 239, I think, right, Omari? And at this point, and I think this is where we can transition to the contract conversation, an outside team, if he left Detroit, is still only able to offer him a 4-year deal and at $177 million. So I do think that is a very important number in this conversation.
To me, like, that's the number. Any outside backs deal for Duren's going to be that 177.3 or 4, whatever it is, which is about 44 a year. The Pistons, the previous max they had was like 239. That would have been around, 40 something with an additional year. And then his current max with the Pistons would put him at, I think 57, around 57 per year on average. So Duren doesn't get the 287 unless the Pistons are like, we just want to make him a $287 million player, which I think with Cade already on the books for that much, I don't think that's going to happen, so we'll see how the negotiation works out. But, more than likely it's, whatever he signs with the Pistons, especially if he gets that outside max offer, then that pretty much for the Pistons locks you in by 44. And then it's, if you want to do 4 or 5 years at that point. But, I see a lot of talk about what a sweet spot for Duren might be, 37, might be 38, this and that. I'm sure the Pistons would love that. But I don't think they're going to be able to get him to accept that if he gets an outside deal that they have to match for 44. So that's kind of what it comes down to. You've only got, I think, 3 teams that could even offer him that max. But again, he's 22 years old. Team saw what he did last year. I think, some teams could buy into that upside. So it'll be curious to see where it ends up. And I also think it's probably not worth long-term stressing $7 million if it is 44 instead of 37. Like, I think with the new cap, like a $7 million difference, kind of like, fretting between spending $5 and $10 on like a meal at the restaurant. Like, 10's more, but it's not going to kill you. That's kind of how I see it, to be honest. Like, they're going to lock in Duren. It's going to be at a big number, and they're going to bank on them continuing to get better. And regardless of what that figure is, that's what it's going to be.
Okay, so Will 313J says, O2, who do you think offers that to him? Like, I will quickly touch on this, because again, we don't want to turn this into Jalen Duren ends up on another team. So the Bulls are a team with cap space this summer and not necessarily a center that they're building around. The Nets have cap space this summer. They do have some centers on their roster, but the Nets are very much like can do anything. And then obviously the big name here is the Lakers. I think an important thing to note, and I think most Pistons fans probably understand this, O2, is Jalen Duren is a restricted free agent. And so it's not like a team can just offer him. This is the DeAndre Ayton situation. If everybody remembers, he may have been the last guy to get an offer sheet from an outside team. That I don't know if that's correct, but he's definitely the last big name to get one. The Pacers gave him an offer sheet. The Suns matched it. I'm not saying that's where this is going to go, but there is that process can sometimes scare teams away, because what it does is if the Lakers were to offer Duren that offer sheet, it ties up their cap space, even if the Pistons are going to match or whatever. So there is some intricacies to this. I still think that 4 for 177 to me is the number where these negotiations end up going.
Yeah, and it's not going to be $30 million a year. That's way too low. I just put it out there now.
I agree.
So it's not going to be that. That's not even in today's NBA. That would be an insult to offer him 150 or something like that. It's going to be a lot more than that.
So here's what I will say. The number where, again, if we're going down this path of we're buying into Jalen Duren and Ausar Thompson as cores of this team, right? Like, I just want to be clear. That's what we're doing today. I would like it to be 30 to 35. That's where I would like it to be. I don't think that that's where it's going to be. My guess is maybe they could get him. So what? 4 for 177 is 43, 44, something like that a year. 44 a year. I do wonder if you could do 5 years at what if you went 5 for 200? Would that be enough for Jalen Duren? You know what I'm saying? To beat out a 4 for 177. And then you're there at 40 million average annual value. 30 is not happening. I don't think so either. So how does that strike you? If I say 5 for 200 for Jalen Duren, Omari, you get him at 40 average annual value. I'm anticipating we see something like that. I anticipate we see something where the average annual value is closer to 40 than it is to 30.
Yeah, like I look at what Şengün got. He signed 5 years, 185. Which comes out to 37 a year. And that was
inflation.
He signed that. So you account for inflation. You account for the fact that I already think Duren's a better defender than Şengün and probably always will be. Yeah, I think 5 years, 200 is quote unquote market value. Like we've seen other centers sort of in that same vein get deals around that. I guess you could call that like a sweet spot type deal. It's not 45, but it's also, I think, more realistic to what just his real world value is going to be. And even if it's less money per year slightly than that 177 max you could get from the outside, it's still more money total, right? It's still 200 versus it's like 33 million more or something like that, or 23 million more or something like that. So
Dave, I will quickly address this. I appreciate the sentiment, but I very much choose the players that I'm a fan of and the players that I'm not of. My love for Scotty Barnes and what he did this season was based off the countless games I watched with my own eyes this year. Sam and I disagree on players all the time. See Ayo Dosunmu. So I would just quickly push back a little bit on that my takes on players are my takes on players, whether it be here or the greater NBA. Darshan, I'm sorry. I agree that Cade, Ausar, Duren are the core. Which player archetypes are the ideal 4th through 9 in the rotation? That's what we're really going to get into today. I think that's what will be fun is how do you build out the rest of this roster and rotation now moving forward? So I think with anything else we need to get to, I feel like we've thrown out the numbers, what we think may end up happening. I think, again, for me, that's where I've thrown out the number I'm comfortable with. I've looked at this a little bit, O2, in terms of what Duren and Ausar could be on in 27, 28, and then what that means for the cap. Let's talk about Ausar and what we think he might get, and then we can kind of show or talk about those numbers overall, right? And where that would put him with 3 players and all of those type of things. So we'll get into Ausar Thompson, first team all defense, and what his contract might look like right after this.
All right, back with segment 2. We're going to talk Ausar, who's extension eligible. Same scenario Duren was in last year. If you don't sign him, then he becomes a restricted free agent and goes to the market, this and that. Ausar is interesting because I think anytime you have a guy of his archetype, and he might be the epitome of his archetype, right? Uber athletic, elite defender, just not a shooter really in any sense. I look at the Dyson Daniels deal that he signed last year where he did, I think, 4 years, 100. But to me, that feels like the floor for Ausar Thompson. And that doesn't mean it's going to go all the way up to 40. But Ausar is a better player than Dyson Daniels. And if Dyson Daniels, at least in my opinion, I think a lot of people maybe feel that way. At least in my opinion, he's a better player than Dyson Daniels. So if he's better than Dyson Daniels got 4-100. What are you looking at for Ausar, right? Are you looking at 4-120, 4-130? Does it get up to 150? I think that's going to be really curious to see just how that shakes out this summer because value-wise, I think those are the hardest players to try to figure out. And a lot of it just comes down to how much do you have to pay to keep other teams away, essentially. Understanding that if Ausar does do this or he does do that, that contract very quickly would become one of the best values in the NBA.
Yeah, Wes brings it up. The other number in the name you're going to hear a lot is the Jalen Suggs deal, which was 5 for 150. Now, the unique thing about... Yeah, 30, and it's descending. So they were in a situation where they knew they were going to get expensive, would be my guess. Not dissimilar from Detroit, right? We're talking about Detroit getting more expensive. When you sign Jalen Duren, we'll talk about what I think that means in terms of I think you're going to have another significant contract on the books at some point. That will be my opinion. We'll get to that in a second. But Suggs is descending. So for example, in 29-30, Suggs is only at 26.7 million, which is 14% of the cap. Now, what you have to be careful with on descending contracts, O2, is extending off of those. right? Think about what the Memphis Grizzlies had to do with Jaren Jackson Jr. last offseason. I know they ended up trading him, but they used their cap space to bump his cap number up and then extend off of that. So just I love descending contracts, but they can somewhat be problematic by the end of them if that number's too low and you want to extend off of it. So that is just one thing to consider. I will say this about Dyson Daniels, though, too. I think Ausar is definitely better than Dyson Daniels defensively. Like, no question in my mind. I will say there are things that Dyson Daniels does better offensively that if Ausar was able to do them, like that would be the home run for Ausar to me. You know what I mean? Like Dyson Daniels has figured this out a little bit. Yeah. And like short rolling and making passing decisions and things like that, where Ausar's still figuring those out. Here's my hot take for the episode. You ready? I don't care if he shoots threes. I don't care. I think he can be a productive offensive player if he figures out the mid-range jumper and the floater and setting DHO screens and get actions and offensive. Like, I think they can figure it out, O2.
And even just the aggression aspect, knowing when to attack and how,
Go get to the free throw line and draw fouls. Here's the other part. Maybe I should say this. I don't know that he's going to get there as a three-point shooter. You know what I mean? Like, he is young. I understand that. He is young. He's got a long way to go. I don't even know if it happens in this contract. Maybe that's the better way to say it. He's not coming back next year and doing it, in my opinion. This isn't anything on his work ethic or anything like that. By all accounts, he's an extremely hard worker. But again, I don't need him doing that. For me, do all of these other things. Like, I know people may or may not think of the Draymond Green offensive role. That is kind of what I would like to see. Like him, you can take advantage of these defenders that don't guard you. Yeah, like the finishing, all of those things. So that's where I'm at on Ausar. I'm thinking if I had to guess what they pay him, let's just say $30 million a year. Can we somewhat agree on that?
Yeah, I think that's the range you're looking at. You bring up Suggs, and to me, Suggs is actually a better example than Dyson. I just think Dyson kind of has the same resume as Ausar a little bit more, but the Suggs 5 years, 150. You're looking at somewhere in that range. It may not be, exactly 30 a year or whatever, but that's the window.
Yeah, I mean, Dave brings up, I love Ausar, but how much can you pay a player averaging 8.2 points per game when nobody's guarding? It's fair. Like, I think with both of these guys, you're really betting on internal growth. If you're going to pay them these numbers with Jalen Duren, it's, hey, we saw what happened in the playoffs, but we believe that the next iteration is a small jump in the regular season from what we saw this past regular season, and then being able to take the regular season into the playoffs. If you're going to give Ausar this number, I think it's because you believe either that he's going to shoot corner threes, which again, I don't, but others may, or he's going to figure out some of these other offensive things. Like, he could very easily get to 10 points per game plus by adding in some of the things we're talking about. I just want to throw this at you. So what do we say? $40 million a year for Duren, right? And then 30 so we're talking about $70 million. Next year, and I know there's like increases and it's not like always this cut and dry. That would mean you would have $124 million between those three players. Just so people know, the cap next year right now is projected at $173 million. The tax line is $210 million. I'm not like pushing a narrative here anyway. I'm just giving the people the numbers. Like, take that the way you want. You may say, hey, that's way too much whenever we need another this or that. You may say, you know what? Actually, $120 million, $25 million. And being that far away from the cap and the tax number, I would actually feel better about that than what I thought. I just wanted to throw those numbers out for people, O2.
Yeah, another thing, too, is just like the way the cap has increased, too. I think it would really take a substantial overpay for both of them to where you're really, really sweating it down the road, more than you already are. I think 70 sounds like a big number. I think especially if maybe you're not as familiar with just the sheer inflation over the last couple of years. But if you have one guy on the max like they do with Cade, and then you get your number 2 and your number 3 for, essentially 2/3 of the max and then half the max, like, I think that's workable long term. I think it is. You still have enough for a substantial fourth piece of some capacity. Most of these teams are running out their rosters with, minimum deals and stuff anyway, and eventually the Pistons will be at that point. They'll continue to have to find the Paul Reeds and Javonte Greens to, hit draft picks to flesh things out. But like, that's a workable number to me because you're still, around 85, 90 under the tax line. which is really the key aspect, right? Can you fill out the roster with $90 million? I think you can.
I think what you said there at the beginning is what's my biggest thing about the numbers are what you said there in terms of, I'm not saying you have to be able to move them, but I feel much better. Would you agree there's a world where you can't end up winning a championship with Duren and Ausar on the team together? Is there at least a world where that's possible? Where eventually you go, this doesn't work?
Yeah, I mean, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think anytime, it's like especially with guys that with their archetype, I mean, I think that makes sense.
Okay, so again, we're going down the road today, and it looks like this is where Detroit's going down the road of they at least want to see if it will work, right? Which, fine. It's not what I would do, but I can live with it. You have to have them on contracts, in my opinion, though, where you can at least get off of them, at the very least, without giving up assets, right? Like, you can't be paying 2 years from now. You can't say, well, this isn't going to work between Ausar Thompson and Jalen Duren, but Duren's making so much money that we're attaching a first-round pick to get off of him whenever you're still trying to bring in other talent. So, to me, that's what's important about the numbers.
Closing windows, that's when you're really in a bad shape.
Correct.
When you're giving up assets to make up for your past mistakes. That could close the window shut quicker than anything. Milwaukee having to stretch and wave Damian Lillard last offseason closed their window.
Yep. Mr. Ray says Pistons are banking heavily on internal development and patient. I have to hope it works. I mean, that's the scenario we're playing out today. So let's play this out more now, okay? Because here's where my mindset has gone over the last few days. And if you've listened to the Game Theory Pistons Offseason Preview, this is going to sound a little bit different because over there I kind of played it out the way I would want to do it. And that's not the way it sounds like Trajan's going to. So I will ask you this, O2, to start our conversation. How comfortable would you be if they just run it back? Like, because there's a world where they could do that. Like, it's just, hey, they run out a starting lineup of Cade, Duncan Robinson, Ausar Thompson, Tobias Harris, Jalen Duren. You're bringing Danis Jenkins off the bench. Like, all of these guys are under contract for next year. Like, where would you land on that in terms of not trying to make the roster better around these core three guys that we're talking about here?
Yeah, this probably isn't popular. That actually would not bother me too much. Just with the understanding that you could make a deal go, before the trade deadline, which teams do every year. Derek White was a trade deadline acquisition. Aaron Gordon was a trade deadline acquisition. Like a lot of, pivotal key guys have been deadline acquisitions. Isaiah Hartenstein, I think, no, he was a free agency guy. I take that back. He was a free agency guy. But,
Yep.
But, I think for the Pistons, I don't think this summer is like the end all be all. I think realistically, you have until next February. If you still want more data or just see how guys grow, like if Ron comes back with a 3-point shot, that probably changes your calculus a little bit, stuff like that. But, I think you could run it back, keep your chips and look up to the deadline. That's the time to make that move for sure, if you wanted to do that.
Okay, so for me, I would be a little bit frustrated by that. I would rather see, here's where this path I'm a little more okay with, is really upgrading the Duncan Robinson and the Tobias Harris spots. Like, if Tobias Harris and Duncan Robinson are coming off the bench for you next year, and or maybe one of them has to get moved, maybe Duncan just, because of the non-guarantee. So let's go through the roster real quick. O2 and just like where they're at salary cap wise, all of that. You have Cade Cunningham, Isaiah Stewart at $15 million. Duncan is at $16 million, but only $2 million guaranteed, non-guaranteed for the next year. Stu actually has a club option for the next year as well. Should mention that. Karis LeVert on an expiring at just under 15. We mentioned Ausar and Jalen Duren, the numbers, but Ausar would still be on the Bucks at $11 million next year. Ron at $9 million. Paul Reed at 5.6 non-guaranteed. Danis at 4 club option. Sasser at 5. Then you have Tolu Smith and Chaz Lanier. Essentially, if you didn't do anything, what do you think about them going under the cap or over the cap? I think that's where the conversation needs to start. So they have roughly $6-7 million in cap space once you figure in the number 21 pick and all of that. Would you be interested in just cutting Duncan Robinson, eating the $2 million, and having $20 million to go look at an outside free agent? Or do they go over the cap and then they're non-tax MLE and those type of things to improve the roster? I think this is where those names. Okay.
I would go over non-tax MLE because I don't think you're going to get a shooter better than Duncan.
Okay. And so what that allows you to do is you can just keep Tobias Harris cap hold and then give him whatever you need there. You can keep Duncan Robinson in that scenario. There's obviously other ways you could create cap space, like trading Karis LeVert if you could find somebody to take him and not bring anything back. But if you're not going to do that, then you might as well go over, because the $6.6 million, the room exception, and those things being split, you can't use those things together. Probably not worth it. So let's operate over the cap here, O2. What are some names? Or let me throw you names and then you tell me interested or not. So non-tax MLE names: John Collins, Rui Hachimura.
I like John Collins a lot. John Collins has always been like the on paper pretty good fit power forward for this team type of guy. I don't know how well he shot the ball last year, but I've always liked his game in general.
What about Rui? Rui, I think, is an interesting name where I think he could be frustrating defensively at times.
Oh, yeah. But John Collins shot 41% for three last year. Oh, he shot 37, 40, and then 41 last 3 years. Okay, great.
You're more sold on John, or are we just done? Like when John Collins is it, and then, no, I'm just joking. Okay, so those are, I don't think John Collins is going to get the full non-tax MLE for what it's worth. I'm interested to see what Rui's market's going to be. If you like John Collins' three-point shooting numbers, look up Rui's while we're talking here, and then click on the little playoffs tab, because I think he shot well over 50% in the playoffs. But
oh, wow. 56.9% on 6 attempts is crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
And he shot 48% on 6 attempts last year.
Yeah. So I think Rui, those names would be interesting to you. Like if non-tax MLE names, if you can get them on there. I think my guess is Collins would be below it. Rui, I don't know. I don't know if Rui comes in above it or right at it or not. I'm not sure what Rui's market's going to be.
Yeah, I feel like I would go John Collins, even though Rui probably is like just the better shooter. Like I just think John Collins just gives you a little bit more overall as a basketball player. But if it is Rui, like, I think both those guys are what you need, right? Which is this young forward who gives you spacing and rebounding. Like they both check that box.
Yeah. So someone says, you don't think Collins gets the full. He wasn't
Rui's
great.
Not an amazing rebounder though.
Collins you might be right. Like maybe
Collins
I'm over.
Is a better rebounder.
Yeah, and Collins was really good the 2 years in Utah. It wasn't quite as good. Like the box score efficiency numbers are good, but just like the scoring was down, the rebounding was down, all of the stuff was a little bit down. I don't know. Maybe he does. It's possible. I could be wrong there. I'll be the first to admit, I don't always gauge the market extremely well in terms of what guys will. Can I throw out another name at you? I think here's what I like about Collins, and the next I'm going to throw at you is it would give you a little bit of flexibility at the center position as well if you wanted to do something. So Dave brings up Collins had a terrible start and still finished 41% from three. So yeah, maybe I'm over-indexing the start of the year for him. What about Sandro Mamukelashvili? I think he would be a lot of fun for this. I don't know that he's quite a starter, but if you told me you just added him to the mix and Tobias Harris was only going to have to play 22 minutes a night now, and Mamukelashvili was playing the other 20 plus minutes and could play a little bit of center. But yeah.
In my mind, Mamu's more of a center than power forward, but he is listed at 6'9".
Yeah, I think he can. I don't think you probably start him at the 4, but I do think he's a guy that can play minutes at the 4 for you. And then he has this skill level at the center position. We'll go to trade targets in a second as well. I also just think he has the coolest name in the NBA, and I really like saying it, and I can say it correctly, and I can spell it correctly. So I'm just really proud of myself for that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm 1 for 3 on that, maybe.
On Mamukelashvili?
Yeah. You said you could say it. You said you could spell it. I don't know what the other one was. I could say his first name. I could say Sandro.
I think my other big thing with this path is getting a legit score next to Cade at the 2. Not just a floor spacer. I would like to see them get a legit score. And I think for me, O2, if they go down this path of really signing Ausar and Duren to big numbers, I'm a little less trade draft picks and, a big investment. So tell me if any of these names are interesting to you. You want to be able to do both, right? Because you're not going to sign Rui to the non-tax MLE and then you won't have anything left. So there is some give and take here. It's probably a trade for one and a signing of another, but CJ McCollum Anthony Simons, Norm Powell, Kobe White, all Bradley Beal actually has a player option. I don't know what he will do there. I actually watched Bradley Beal coach EYBL this weekend. He was getting after it. It was kind of fun to watch. Chris Paul was also there coaching. That was interesting. He had an interesting interaction with an official. But Bradley Beal, like any of those names interesting to you? CJ McCollum, Simons, Powell, Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu?
Yeah, CJ McCollum was a guy we talked about at the deadline a little bit, just veteran point guard who can, he had a really good playoffs too. He, stepped up and hit a lot of big shots for him. CJ, I think he makes sense, just as if you want to substantially relieve K of ball handling duties, then I think you go CJ. The question of whether or not you start CJ, I think is an interesting debate. Anthony Simons did a bit more score first, but I think on this team with Danis on the roster, that could work because he is a bucket. He's a scorer. He's absolutely a guy that could heat up even in a playoff series and get you some really tough buckets. Ayo, obviously he's the guy people, wish they had swung for at the deadline and maybe, tossed in some seconds and made it happen. He's an unrestricted free agent. I think part of the reason why they didn't do it is because he's an unrestricted free agent and they didn't want to give up assets essentially for a rental, just to not win a championship. But Ayo, obviously he had that 42 or 43 point game in the playoffs, whatever it may be. But he's just an all-around really good guard and he has been since he came into the league. He's one of those guys that it's not a Piston, but you watch him and he just kind of has that Pistons basketball spirit to him a little bit. Maybe he stays in Minnesota. I think after they maneuvered at the deadline to clear their finances a little bit, they do have a path to keep him and have his bird rights. So, we'll see what happens there. You mentioned Bradley Beal, injury history. I think I'm just I'm good. Who are some of the other names? But all those names work. All those guards could come in and score and give you some real ball handling. Kobe White, another guy, he sees the floor well. He can really shoot, really hit shots. He makes sense. Another guy people thought they probably should have traded for at the deadline, but again, unrestricted free agent. They can just go sign him. They don't have to bird rights or not, whatever. It may not even take that to, sign him. So all those guys make sense. I think you could debate the pros and cons either way, but they all check the boxes that they need checked.
Wes brings up, is Powell only to get the MLE? I think that's part of why I wanted to bring up all these names and talk about going over versus under the cap. Because if you want your pick and you only have the non-tax MLE, then you may simply get outbid by a team that has cap space, or you're only offering the same thing that another team has, and they might they may just choose that team over you. I only bring up the cap space route because with one move, even if it's just the Duncan Robinson move, all of a sudden you could have cap space that is more than the non-tax MLE. So everybody I talk to, Kyle Metz, Yossi Goslin, who I'm going to record with, I think tomorrow or something like that, they all tell me the cap space route is most likely not what Detroit will do. And I hear them and I understand them and I agree with them. All I'm saying is if there is one of these players that Detroit says that's the guy, right? That's the guy, either the 2 or the 4 that we really think is going to help us. They do have a path at least to getting to more than the non-tax MLE number, which is where a lot of the other teams in the NBA are going to be. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Let's go to break. When we come back, I'll throw some trade names at you. We don't have to get into value and what it would take. This isn't the Trey Murphy section of the podcast or the offseason. These are names similar to what we've been talking about here. I'll throw those at you right after this, O2.
All right, we're going to kick off segment 3 here. We still have some names to get to, and then we have some questions started as well. So go ahead and get those in here at the last second, and we'll try to make some time for you. But who else you got for me, Bryce?
I think a name that Wes has brought up before, but what about Naz Reid? We talk about Minnesota. I do wonder where they're at with their cap situation.
That's a good point, because it's can they bring back Ayo and Naz Reid? You're looking at somewhere between 35 and 40 million, maybe, to bring them both back. I don't know.
I think my perfect offseason, and I don't know how you get Naz Reid, because I don't know that I want Detroit in this scenario playing out what we're doing here to give up a future first. I do kind of like the idea of, okay, can you get Naz Reid, and then could you use the non-tax MLE on one of those guards we talked about, right? And all of a sudden, if you have a starting lineup with Cade, I hate to throw a name because I don't know who actually is going to go for that or not. I'll say CJ McCollum if people want to yell at me and say that CJ is going to go for more than that, I'll listen to it. But to me, that would be interesting. Cade, CJ McCollum, Ausar, Naz Reid, Jalen Duren. You would be able to, by order of operations, bring Tobias Harris still off the bench. Now, you would be giving up something. Like, to me, for Naz Reid, you're probably giving up Duncan Robinson, and you're probably giving up Ron Holland if you're not giving up a first-round pick or something like that. So, again, we don't have to get into that, but how does Naz Reid sound to you?
Yeah, I mean, Naz Reid sounds great. I think he's everything you need at power forward. Obviously a guy who could really go get you a bucket, could really shoot it. Not bad defensively. I guess maybe you could debate the defensive impact between him and Tobias, but, I think we're still on the offensive end. You could play him with Duren, you could play him with Stu, you could play him with P. Reed. Like, there's really no...
You can play him at center, O2,
and
right?
You can play
with
him at
Ausar.
center with Ausar. And he could be that floor space at 5. And he just, not only does he feel a lot from just a lineup standpoint, but actually on the floor too. He's just a great player. I mean, realistically, he's like, if he were to become available, he probably is one of the better realistic power forwards who will become available this summer. Maybe Michael Porter Jr. works his way back into that fold somehow or something. I don't know. But I mean, Naz Reid is great. Absolutely great. He would really fit this team well.
Okay. Some other names here that I just wrote these names down. I'm not saying that they would be the perfect
also,
fit.
Naz Reid is only 26, and in my mind, he has been 32 his entire career, but he's only 26. So he's right there with the other guys as far as age.
Sadiq Bey, Jeremy Grant, if you just wanted the rotation at the 4 spot, his contract's at least getting short enough now. And I would assume, I don't think you would have to give up anything to bring him in. Bobby Portis is always a name.
Yeah.
Kuzma.
And then Portis, if Milwaukee blows it up, then they probably don't keep Bobby Portis. And he's not a free agent, is he?
No, these are all trade names. Trade names.
Yeah. I was going to say, Bobby, his contract's not crazy either. So that would be, I don't know what it would cost you, but I mean, from a value standpoint, that's close to as good as it gets, I think.
I will say it was harder to find. So this is kind of to people's questions earlier. I found it harder to come up with trade names in this realm of players as that scoring guard or wing, unless it was a big name, right? Like the Kyrie Irving, Zach LaVine, whatever. And that's not really what I'm trying to come up with today. So some of the other names I came up with: Emmanuel Quickley, DeJounte Murray, Shaedon Sharpe, DeMar DeRozan, Malik Monk, Jordan Poole, Bryce Sensabaugh. Any of these names interesting to you, O2?
Jordan Poole is an interesting name.
He is on an expiring contract.
On an expiring contract, can really, really shoot it, can really handle it. And on a Pistons team where, I think his skill set just kind of fits, where he's got guys who could cover for him defensively. He went to Washington, right? I feel like guys play for Washington and then you just don't hear anything about them until they go to a different team. But yeah, Jordan Poole, I think, would fit really well. Emmanuel Quickley is interesting.
Long contract.
Guard.
Yeah. I would just say it's a long contract.
Yeah.
It's 32.5, but yeah.
Yeah. Emmanuel Quickley is an interesting name. Just as a pure player, he's great. Something the Pistons will have to figure out this offseason in general is that ratio between ball handling and still having size on the floor. Because obviously a lot of ball handlers you're looking at would be by far the smallest rotation guy in the lineup last year, which Quickley would be. I mean, at a starting 5 where everybody was over 6'6". So I don't know how much you want to mess with that. And he's not a bad defender. Despite his size, he still gets after it. So maybe that could work. I like his game. I mean, I always liked Emmanuel Quickley as a player. So. But he's a little bit pricier too, as you said.
Okay, so the last name I'll bring up here, and then we'll get to the start, and Wes can start throwing those questions and comments at us. And a little bit of a shameless plug here. Over on the Motor City Hoops Substack, I did a Drew Holiday it's not a video breakdown of his game. It's just me talking through his contract situation, the synergy numbers, and then my raw notes on him. Some of you may like it, some of you may not. You may not like how I went about doing that. It's just based on the time I have, that's the best chance I have to do some of those things. But my thing, Flight Monk, I did say that Emmanuel Quickley's contract was very long and expensive. I definitely mentioned it. So just to be clear. But I brought up Drew Holiday over there. I don't know where Portland is at with him. I think this would be an interesting fit in terms of a guy that can...
that they're interested in having them back, but I mean, with their new ownership, I don't know what they're going to do this summer, so we'll just have to see.
I mean, he can play on the ball. He can play off the ball. I was really surprised by his 3-point shooting numbers when I did that breakdown. And then I see one, somebody continues to comment about, building the defense, which I'm okay with. I don't mind that if that's the path you want to take. But he defends. He's not the defender he used to be, but if he's the second guy with Ausar being the first guy, I think he'll be fine. And he has versatility. I came away from that like, man, this is actually kind of interesting, especially if you're not going true star hunting just yet. The Trey Murphy names, the whoever. So what would you think about Jrue Holiday? And then Wes, we can get to the questions and run through those.
Yeah, I mean, Jrue Holiday is Jrue Holiday. To bring in his defense, just his veteran savvy, obviously has always been able to shoot it. I know he's getting older, like he's got to be 35 or 36 next season, right? So obviously you're not maybe picturing his usual type of role, something a bit smaller, but I mean, he would fit this team like a glove. You're already the number 2 defense, and then you add Jrue Holiday, who fixes so much other stuff you need, right? And you could play him with Dennis. I think you could slot him in next to anybody. Like you could even play him and Sass together if you wanted to, just because Jrue is, he's 6'4", but he's so strong. Like he's a lot bigger than 6'4". So I mean, that would be nice if you get Jrue, it's hard to find a better fit, when you take into account the defensive end.
Yes. Fly Monk 321 says Jrue only had 2 years, right? Yes, only 2 years. So that's what I like about this as well is you lock in that salary slot. He's at 34.8 this year, 37.2 the next year on a player option. I would assume he will plan on exercising that player option. He'll be 37 years old. Like that's definitely part of this equation. I understand that, but you would have that salary slot locked in to either trade, whatever, especially 18 months from now, whenever you would be at the deadline. Okay, we need to get to the questions. I have not like an extremely hard out, but a little bit of a hard out here at 6 p.m. Eastern, but I want to get to the questions. And then also one thing, everybody, we will do NBA drafts next episode. And here's why, like we have a legitimate reason. The withdrawal deadline is Wednesday. It's something really, if you're into the Pistons draft situation, you want to be keen in on, because we're going to see a lot of guys make their decisions on staying or going. And my worry was we could talk about 8 players today at 21 for the Pistons, and 3 of them could end up going back to school by Wednesday because the NIL numbers are just that good or whatever. Now, it may not be that much of an exodus back to college basketball, but I just didn't want us to waste our time whenever we're this close anyway. So we will have NBA draft stuff. I might throw some names at Omari just so he can get some quick, scouting and all of that. And then we can talk about him a little bit more depth. But we'll figure that out next week. Okay, Wes, let's throw the questions, the comments up, and we'll go through these. It looks like we have about 10 of them. I'm more concerned. This is from Ben. I'm more concerned about what to do with Stu. 2 years in a row, he was almost a non-factor in the playoffs. Does he have good trade value? My quick answer, O2, is I'm a little bit nervous about this as well. It's kind of why names like John Collins, Naz Reid, Sandro Mamukelashvili, I like those names because it's like, man, if you do decide it's time to move on from Stu, those guys can play the 4 and the 5, and it gives you some more versatility there. People know how much of a fan I've been of Isaiah Stewart and how important I thought he's been to this team and would be in the playoffs. Unfortunately, we just haven't seen it either of the years. And again, I'm not touching the injury thing until we get a report. So I just want to throw that out there.
And as far as that, Trajan also said at this press conference that he wasn't injured. So Stu, Trajan, JB, all went on the record and said, no, he's not injured. Trajan talked about some conditioning stuff coming off of the calf. And bottom line is that, yeah, like he didn't give the Pistons what they needed in the playoffs. Last year he was hurt, obviously, so that's one thing. But I think the issue overall with Stu, as he gets deeper into his career, is just the availability, right? He played 58 games last year. He did play 72 the year before, but the year before that, he played 46. Then the year before that, he played 50. Some of that is, a couple of suspensions mixed in there. But even with that, he's had some lower body injuries. And, it did seem like he just did not have his usual movement and pop in the postseason for whatever reason. I mean, I don't know how else you go from blocking 8 shots in game 3 to not blocking another shot until it was like game 5 or 6 against Cleveland or something like that. I don't think that means you have to trade him. Like, obviously, that's all very value dependent. And we've seen what he can do. And we've also seen guys with some injury issues eventually be able to kind of, move past it and solve whatever the issue was and play at a high level. And on paper, I still love Stu as a playoff player. I still love him as a rim protector, as a guy that can switch and, could essentially survive in any scheme or, against any opposing lineup. I still find those things to be true, even if it didn't manifest, in this year's series. And he's on a good deal. He's making $15 million next season and then $15 million the year after. And then, that last year he's expiring. So, maybe you have to figure something out then. But, I still think Stu's value overall has exceeded his contract. But yeah, if he can't get past the availability issues, especially late in the season, then, maybe that does prompt some bigger questions as it goes on. But I don't think that's something you need to resolve this offseason per se. Just let him get healthy, come back in the next year. They understand that he was their best rim protector. So, he still has an important role here.
Yeah, I would not sell on Stu this summer. At the very least, he's still a very, feel like we give some people hey, it was their first playoffs. We're giving a little bit of a pass. I think Isaiah Stewart should be afforded the same thing, right? It was kind of his first playoffs. Even though he's not only 22, it still was the first one for him as well. So why can't he grow and learn from that also? Okay, Wes, next one. Ray Floyd, who is the 4 of the future? Do we draft them or trade? So based on our little exercise, Omari, I still think that I like some of the, I don't know. Here's what I think there's more free agents at that off-ball wing scorer. So then you would need to trade for that 4-man. But just pick between Collins, Rui, Sandro Mamukelishvili, Naz Reid. What's the name there that you like the most?
I would go Naz Reid. I think he's just been the best and most versatile player of those 4. I would go Naz Reid.
I think depending on what it would take to acquire him in the trade, right? I think just in a vacuum, that's the name that I've really come around on. And I do think you would bring him in, start him at the 4, but then you could also play him at the 5 in some lineups as well. So, all right, next question, Wes. Fly Monk 321. Is there any chance Duncan is on the team next year? I can't imagine not using the $2 million guaranteed by either trading or releasing him. I do think there's a chance. I think if they want to go cap space, I think he's the most obvious name, but then you have to know that you're replacing that 3-point shooting ability and that floor spacing.
For example, if you need, if you were to trade for, I'm throwing a name out there, but Michael Porter Jr., you probably have to include Duncan. I mean, I don't know if you could make that type of deal if I included him.
Yeah. And I think this is right, but I'm pretty sure that if they're going to trade Duncan, they have to fully guarantee the deal. So remember that for the other team's side of things. They can't trade him and then he's not an expiring deal if he's in a trade. He gets locked in at that $16 million, but that $16 million number is a pretty good salary matching. So if I think they're going to go over the cap, if the path I think that they're probably most likely to do, I think he probably stays on the roster, but I would have to kind of work out the numbers in terms of how close that would put them to the tax number, first apron, all of that, really just the tax, because you have to be able to use the non-tax MLE. I need to crunch some of those numbers. But to your point, he would be the easiest one. Okay, next one. Okay, hold on real quick. People are mad at us about Michael Porter Jr. My thing was I didn't want to do the big, to me, Porter Jr.'s a bigger name than what we're talking about. So maybe people disagree with that, but I was trying not to do the Michael Porter Jr., Kawhi Leonard, Kyrie Irving, those bigger names.
Michael Porter is just, if you're trading for a guy with that salary, then yeah, Duncan's money probably has to be included in that. But otherwise, again, if you just want, the 14 or 15 million you save by parting ways with him, then the question is, okay, but are you going to find another wing that is going to shoot 44% from 3 on the volume he did? What are you getting for that money, essentially?
Peyton Watson probably is a name we should have talked about, because I don't know that he's going to be that name, but restricted free agency is so hard. I mean, I guess there could be sign and trade there. I will say, we're not going to get into it, but RJ Barrett's a name I kind of sneaky like, but anyway, yes, there it is. Okay, bring that last one back up, Wes. I don't want to get into the RJ Barrett thing now. Steven says, JD and Ausar is one question. A lot of people are saying you can't move forward with JD, Ausar, Stu, and Ron, all non-shooters in the rotation. How does that figure in? Listen, I don't think it's part of the equation now. To me, it sounds like they've decided they want to keep JD and Ausar. And so I think you try to maximize the roster around that to make that work. And then we kind of talk Stu. Ron is such an X factor right now, too. That's probably one of the big things at some point we need to talk in the couple weeks is just where does he go from here?
Yeah, Ron is in that peak. You trade him now, maybe you trade him too early because in 2 years he adds those things to his game that you need. Yeah, it's fair to wonder, I mean, yeah, if you re-sign JD, Ausar, Stu, and Ron, and none of those guys are shooting the ball, you still got to find shooting elsewhere. I think the counterpoint is that you just won 60 games with these guys and went to the break and going to the ECF. So maybe the defensive ceiling is so high that you can just find some auxiliary shooting and, see if that works. But with any build, you don't solve everything at once. We've seen plenty of teams lock in their guys and then, make trades here and there where needed. Julius Randle was a Knick until he wasn't a Knick, and so they had to go and get somebody else. Like, that's a pretty common part of team building is you understand that there are inherent fit issues, but you figure that out as it comes. I think you can go into this offseason understanding some of these guys have to figure out how to shoot or we got to make changes, but also understand that your floor of these guys, is 61 second round playoff team. So you can figure it out from there. But yeah, I think the front office also is aware like we need some shooting and those guys are giving it to you.
Real quick, Wes, Chuck said, I would love to know what the brain trust for the Pistons thinks about Ron's future. Chuck, this is always, to be a fly on the wall, to just listen to the conversations is literally my dream. If any Pistons front, I just want to sit there and listen. So I know that's not going to happen. All right, last three. Peyton Watson would be awesome. That's from Slim. Peyton Watson would be very interesting. Restricted free agency also, though, is kind of tough. Aaron Gordon's another good name. I saw somebody throw out Cam Johnson. I think one of those guys probably isn't on the Nuggets next year. I guess the other name would be Christian Brown. So I do think that there is a move with one of those guys from Denver because I don't think they're going to have all of those guys. So those are really good names as well. Listen, guys, we have another few weeks to go here. We're not going to do a whole episode of the draft next week, so we will get into some more of this. Here's what I'd say. If you have kind of a off-season path, maybe what we'll do. We'll just kind of ask for some off-season paths that involve keeping Ausar and Duren, and then we can hash those out. We've done something like that before. So we'll do that over the next couple of weeks. We will at least have a general conversation about, I think with Duren especially, it's good to have the conversation of what would happen if they moved him, because even for me and wanting him at a certain number, you always have to then go, well, how do you replace him? And I don't think that that's as easy as what you think. So anyway, maybe it is. Maybe for some of you it is. It wasn't for me. That's what I should say. It wasn't as easy for me as what I thought it was going to be. Thank you for everybody that was here. It was a great turnout. The chat, I literally had to turn it over to Wes because I couldn't keep up with it. So thank you guys so much, all of you, for engaging. Great comments, questions. Seemed like everything stayed pretty respectful and all of that throughout. There was a couple, just remember, we're all just people talking Pistons here. So be kind to everybody. We'll be back a week from now or so. Enjoy the playoffs. Keep an eye on the withdrawal day on Wednesday. Go listen to Wes and Blake over on the Pin Down. O2, take it away, my guy.
Yeah. What draft is in a month, right?
It snuck up on me a little bit here, O2.
Yeah, it's kind of weird doing your first week after playoffs episode, and it's Memorial Day, and it's wow, we have a month to talk about a lot of stuff because you're gonna draft, free agency, summer league pretty quickly once you get to that point.
We barely talk draft, and it will be June. Yeah. It will be the month of the draft before we really start talking about it, which is not been I guess last year we didn't have to talk about it at all, but we'll bring you some good draft coverage, I promise.
Yeah, we're going to jam a lot in over the next month. So great Memorial Day episode. Thank you everybody for joining us on your day off. Obviously means a lot. We have a lot of great content coming up for you all. So with that, I'll go ahead and close this out. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Dakota Avery Nichols, and big shout out to Wes Davenport, as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.